Hola, buenos días a todos, bienvenidos al Espacio Fundación Telefónica. Sabéis que es un espacio cultural nuevo que hemos inaugurado hace apenas 3 semanas y hoy iniciamos estos 3 días dedicados a la narrativa transmedia. Hoy lo vamos a dedicar sobre todo a entender qué es esto del transmedia. Mañana mucho más a cómo se está usando transmedia en educación y el último día más relacionado con transmedia y activismo social. Entonces, simplemente era, por mi parte, daros la bienvenida en nombre de Fundación Telefónica y deciros algunas cosas de índole práctico, ¿no? Ya lo veis allí, pero la wifi es la que se llama servicios, la clave es wifi museo. Saludamos a toda la gente que nos está siguiendo en streaming, que normalmente lo que estamos viendo ahora es que suele ser del orden de 3 veces la gente que está en presencial. Y bueno, simplemente esperar que vengáis estos 3 días, que disculparnos un poco porque los lunes siempre es más complicado para entrar, porque el lunes es un día que está cerrado el espacio y entonces siempre tenemos que esperar algo más y hay más control. Y desearos que disfrutemos de estos 3 días, que para mí también es un gran descubrimiento. Y una cosa que es importante, quería agradecer al verdadero organizador de este Transmedia, que es el que está ahí repasando sus notas, es Fernando Carrión, que ha tenido todo el cuidado de montar todo esto. Realmente él es el que nos trajo el proyecto, que el año pasado lo había hecho, y es un entusiasta. La verdad es que yo no sé cómo vamos a llenar el vacío de los 10 correos que nos mandaba cada día durante 3 meses, pero haremos lo posible por llenar ese vacío. Fernando, tu turno.
Muchas gracias, Pepe. Lo primero de todo, me gustaría darle las gracias a Fundación Telefónica y al Espacio Fundación Telefónica por la oportunidad que nos brinda de organizar este año un buen Living Lab, un buen Transmedia Living Lab en Madrid, que esperamos que ya se vaya consolidando. Este ya es el 2.º año y cada vez mejor y con invitados más interesantes, cada vez más gente, y yo creo que la atención mediática que estamos teniendo es francamente impresionante. Así que muchísimas gracias a Telefónica, muchísimas gracias a vosotros los que habéis venido en persona, muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos estáis siguiendo por streaming. Y vamos a pasar ya rápidamente con el primer ponente del día. Hoy vamos a dedicar la jornada a lo que es creación transmedia. Vamos a hablar de creación en todas sus vertientes. La primera ponencia va a correr a cargo de Robert Pratten. Robert Pratten viene de Londres, pero su experiencia va más allá del territorio europeo. Ha trabajado mucho tiempo en Estados Unidos también. De hecho, está un poco a caballo entre Europa y América, y nos va a contar un poco toda la experiencia que él tiene trabajando con clientes, con marcas, en proyectos de ficción, en proyectos de entretenimiento, los libros que ha escrito, los que está preparando, los nuevos proyectos educativos que está haciendo. Y sin más, os dejo ya directamente con Robert Pratten. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Buenos días. That's the limit of my Spanish, I'm afraid. So apologies for the English. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I should put my watch where I can actually see the time. So I plan to speak for maybe an hour, and then that should leave 30 minutes or so for questions. And I hope there will be questions. And what I'm going to present is some of our vision, some of our experiences, and also some of our methodology. And I hope that today will be inspiring and will give you some ideas about how to get started with transmedia storytelling. And if you're already started, well, then maybe some ideas about how you might incorporate new things into that. So this is me. This is my life, captured in a few graphics. And as I won't go into detail, but you can see that my kind of career experience spans entertainment, marketing, and technology. And for me, that's why I find transmedia a sweet spot, because I'm combining all of those things. So transmedia is very definitely about the storytelling, about the experiences that we can enable. But I think technology is playing a big role. I think where we sometimes run into problems is when technology is the end goal. But here it's just really seen as an enabler. So my company is called Transmedia Storyteller Limited, and as it says here, we power remarkable experiences. So we're not a content creation company, we're not a studio. We're here to help you create transmedia stories and to deliver them. And this triangle looks at our sort of consulting offer, and you see that everything we do is driven by this narrative design, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. And we also have a technology platform called Conductor, and it's a pervasive entertainment platform, which means we envisage story worlds that are with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with characters that speak to you from the cloud when you're travelling on the bus, or when you wake up first thing in the morning, or when you're watching TV. So I'm not one for big kind of motherhood statements, but I think this was intended to set the scene really about the importance to us of experiences. And I think one of the things we sometimes brush over when designing transmedia experiences, transmedia stories, is really the user journey, the audience experience. And that's something that will keep coming up throughout this presentation. So I believe that experience is king, and whereas people might say content is king, I think it's the experience of the content, to understand how people first come in contact with the content, what their reaction will be, what mindset you're trying to get them into, how they're going to feel inside. And often I find that when people are creating transmedia stories, and particularly documentary, like iDocs, this type of thing, there's just too much content. And people think, I'm building this big, immersive experience, and really what they mean is they're generating lots of content. But it's emotion that leads to immersion. So if you want to immerse people in your world, then you have to think first about the emotion that you're trying to generate. And that will be true with any kind of single media, with a film or a book. But I think it's particularly key with transmedia storytelling, so that you don't keep producing lots of encyclopedic content that you think everyone will explore. Because different people that come in contact with your world have different things that turn them on, and not everybody wants to go exploring. I think lots of people look at the internet as having been bad for their business. If you're in the content creation business, you often see people talking about YouTube, about how now it's flooded with dross, flooded with skateboarding dogs and sort of piano playing cats and so on. But I think the truth is actually that the internet kills mediocrity, because if you're very, very bad or you're very, very good, then you will find an audience, because people share what they connect with. And the problem is that there's too much content that just doesn't connect. I think in this world of social media that transmedia kind of plays a role in, it's vital to create this outstanding content that people want to share, because word of mouth really is key. And now it's not the only thing, and I'm going to, the next couple of slides we'll talk about this, but it's really to look at using new media to get some kind of leverage to get into the old media. If you look at TV broadcasters, if you look at established newspapers, they have huge audiences that just consume more or less what they're given. Now you're creating content that hopefully you understand your audience, and you might think, well, I really understand this audience. Your goal is really to dig deep, find that audience, and have them spread the word. And by them spreading the word, that's going to get you visibility with this old media, and then you'll reach all the people that weren't out there looking for you, but only by maybe from the top 10 lists. So just one final thing on this side, and that is that marketing and your storytelling should be baked in. It should be designed from the beginning. And it's not enough to create something and then think, right, well, now I'm going to worry about how people are going to find it, how people are going to share it, or exactly who is this intended for. So you really need to start thinking of that from the beginning. So I'm going to show a number of examples through here, and this is the first example. This is a project called Low Lifes, And Lowlifes was a novella, a 10-episode web series, and a blog. And each character, there were 3 central characters, and each character had their own media. So this slide shows how that content was released. So the novella was always intended to be our kind of revenue-generating platform. So the story was written by an author called Simon Wood, who is well known in this kind of crime mystery genre. He's not like a huge author, but he does have, a reasonable audience. And so the plan, part of the test for this Lowlifes project, because it was very sort of low budget, just a collaboration between he and I, was that we would make everything available for free, but we would also try to sell the novella. And we put the paid content out right from day one, and then the free stuff we kind of published more or less on a date and time schedule over a 3-week period. So if you were prepared to wait 3 weeks, then you could see everything for free. But if you got hooked with those early chapters and you really couldn't wait till the end, then you could buy the Kindle version, for example, or the paperback ahead of coming out. Now, we also had a little game that ran alongside this. We released this ahead of this kind of scheduled releasing, but it also continued beyond it. And what you could do is, if you went to one of the characters' websites, who was a private investigator, you could help her solve a puzzle, or it wasn't actually solve a crime, it was to find an assistant to help in the novella, that she would use in the novella. And this was very, very kind of early days of testing out our technology platform. So this was going to be a kind of proof of concept for our technology. So we were going to use this to interact with the audience and publish all this content. And more or less what happened here was you would email the character and she would send you a quest. You would go scavenging on the internet to find the answer. You would email back the answer, then she would send you on another quest. So it was very kind of you do this, I'll give you a reward, or I'll give you another challenge. You do this, I'll give you another reward. So just to look at some of the metrics, I mean, one of the things I didn't say at the start is that I think the majority of the slides in this presentation are being shown for the first time today outside of the clients that we've been working with. So the marketing budget, there was no marketing budget. The marketing budget was zero, but our production budget was $500. So we were just working with what we had. So Simon obviously didn't get paid. I didn't get paid. I did the videos. But the idea is it would be a revenue share, and it was a small enough project that $500 we could gamble that, because we were going to give it all away for free. We wanted to see what happened. So I think one of the interesting things here is that we paid back on our £500 investment. Of course, $2,000 is not enough to give up your day job, but it's all kind of relative, really, about the amount of effort and so on that you put in. So it paid for itself in about 3 or 4 months. And if you look at the number of people that were interacting with Lauren Ortega, that was our private detective, it was about 9% of the total sort of sales volume. Now, on this next slide, what I'm showing here, I've used YouTube views as a kind of proxy for our social media activity. So it wasn't our only activity. We had Twitter and SlideShare and some other things. But it's just a good way to compare the video views with sales of the Kindle book. And if you notice on here, what happens is that initially there's lots of social media activity, but very little sales. And then you see the sales start to pick up later on. And what we've found is that there's actually this tipping point around about here when all of a sudden the book sales kind of leap. And we looked into this, and what happened was the advocates, the people that were, let's say, Simon's established audience, the people that were discovering the free content, pushed us up into an Amazon top list. And that meant that people who only buy from these kind of top 10s, or they're not out there looking for stuff, they buy based on, you know, what's presented in front of them. That meant it got to a wider audience. And so this is exactly an example of where we're leveraging that kind of 9%, if you want to say, of kind of committed people to reach that much wider audience. And then you see the sales come through. And this diagram illustrates what I was saying before about having to, when you're building your projects, really think about who the audience is and how you're going to enable them to spread the word. And it is a bit like drilling for oil, because it does take a committed effort to find these people and really connect with them. But if you connect, then you'll find that it really does. And it's not, if you look at, I know Henry Jenkins is speaking on Wednesday, and he'll probably give an example of Coney, and there are lots of it like Susan Boyle and so on. But in almost all these cases, what you find is this combination of social media bringing a particular thing to the attention of old media, to the broadcaster, and then it reaching a wider audience, and then people come on. So I imagine if you're at a transmedia conference, you're probably out there looking for cool stuff. But most people don't look for cool stuff. Most people only go to the cinema like once or twice a year, and then they're going to see the James Bond movie or Harry Potter. And, you know, if you're going to really make big dollars, these are the people that you need to branch out to. But if you're an independent creator, you probably don't have that kind of budget to reach those people, so you need to focus on this, you know, hardened core. Swapping this over. So we see the same thing everywhere. I'm going to talk about another project now. And so we did a project in Florida, and I'm going to there's a video that comes after this, I'm going to let that introduce it. But while we're still on this idea about the core kind of spreading the thing, the same thing happened with this presentation. I put this presentation on SlideShare and tweeted that it was available, and then posted it back onto Facebook. And the people that are friends of mine on Facebook, friends of ours as Transmedia Storyteller followers, their enthusiasm for the presentation meant that it got pushed onto SlideShare's, you know, big hot on Facebook page, and that meant it was available to lots more people. So you can find these tipping points in lots of different places where you're working with a hardcore to reach a much larger audience. So I'll let this video introduce this project.
Really close to real life.
Is there sound? No. Let's go back.
Really close to real life because we use the real tools like Facebook, Twitter, and email.
For a while, I kind of thought it was real life. We decided to embrace transmedia storytelling. We've never seen it done in education before.
We had over 600 students, classrooms all over Florida, and the only way to do that was to kind of find I would call it a storytelling engine, and I was really fortunate to find Conductor.
This is Bob Landon, and we're bringing you breaking news this morning of a fiery rocket crash in the small town of Milledgeville, Florida.
What we try to do is create an environment, a story, that would allow the kids to take responsibility.
We're looking for new ways to engage students, and what better way than to meet them in their means of communication. They're digital natives. This is the world that we live in now.
There's this fictitious company called Cosmic Voyage Enterprises, and they are launching a rocket to the International Space Station. During the launch, there's a problem. The rocket goes off course, and it crashes into the town of Milledgeville, Florida.
We don't know what's going on. We don't know if we're going to be able to go back to our house.
We had to create a very deep experience for the kids to be engaged. And of course, that means we had YouTube videos, we had Facebook, we had Twitter.
I think some of the challenges that we faced with a project like this were coming up with ways to creatively respond when the students interacted. We wanted them to have a real life situation, and Conductor enabled us to do that.
We're very social creatures. Our brain thrives on being able to make connections. So that interactivity, even if it's electronic interactivity, we're giving the students an opportunity to revisit something, reprocess it in their mind, send an email, and get a response.
I thought it was interesting that they set up actual accounts for the people that were involved in the story. We all receive our information, all the different board members receive different information about the problem. So we only get a piece of the picture. So that kind of imitates how it would actually be within a company.
It was kind of like get more of a feel for what had happened, if this happened in real life, how people would react.
The transmedia storytelling was really engaging for the students. It was nice to see them getting the information from multiple sources rather than just pulling it out of a book. The concept that in the real world, the information does come from different places and we don't have it all coming to us from one place.
I think what made this project even possible was the ease of use of Conductor.
Helps to develop their intellectual capacity.
It was much more engaging in the story than if we just had like typed up reports of what was going on.
Challenges them in multiple ways. They're figuring out and learning that news media is a 24-hour cycle.
It's important to incorporate technology in the classroom because that's what the students want.
So there were 600 students across Florida organised into teams of 5, and each student in that team had a specific role on the board, or actually on a C-level executive team of a space cargo company. So there would be the CEO, the marketing officer, the financial officer, and so on. And over a 3-week period, we delivered to the students these breaking news videos, because on day 1, their rocket ship, or a rocket ship from their company, crash lands into a local town and causes this environmental damage. And now the children have to collaborate in the classroom to formulate a response. They're given a budget, and they need to work within the budget to solve the problem. So the learning objectives, the whole project was financed by a charity that wants to teach students ethics and financial responsibility. And they wanted to simulate a real-life kind of situation to really put the kids into this position where they're having to think for themselves, they need to collaborate, because if there was information that should only go to the CEO, then only the CEO would get that. And if there was information that only should go to the marketing director, then only the marketing director got that. And so they needed to work together in order to find a solution. And one of the things that we were able to do with this was really personalise the experience for the children, to really make it engaging for them and show them that the decisions they made would affect how this story rolled out, how the solution that they proposed at the end was affected by their decisions. So on week 2, one of the students gets an email from a whistleblower, and they say, that rocket ship should never have gone off. The payload was overweight and we were negligent in doing this. And so now they have information and they need to decide what they're going to do with that. And they also someone else gets an email from the Environmental Protection Agency. That's the government body that's managing this cleanup. And this person says to them, if you give me a bribe, I'll write a more favourable report. And that means they can, use their budget. Their budget's going to go further. And so they need to decide what they're going to do with this information. Now, what we do inside Conductor is we tag the students based on how they respond to these dilemmas. And that means that the story unfolds differently for them. Some information is then withheld because of the choices they've made, and other information might be revealed. We also introduce these game-style rewards. Lots of children are used. I'm not saying every child plays games, but lots do. And they're familiar with getting a kind of a level up or a badge when they complete some kind of task within a game. And we brought that into this educational experience. So if we saw that children were interacting, engaging with the characters, and believe me, they were. I mean, in the evening, so I was based in London, and this was running in Florida. And so I could see that some of the children were sort of there after school hours, communicating on Twitter with these sort of local villagers, because we'd set up like a Greenpeace activist, and we had the like a painter whose studio was demolished, and they're going, I'm really sorry about what's happened, and I want to assure you that we're putting this together. So the children really got into this role play thing, and for those, what we did was they would get then communication from like one of the board of the company sort of governors or directors, and they would say, I really like what you're doing, and I'm going to give you tickets to go and see the ball game, behind the catcher. So they were kind of fake rewards. They didn't actually get any proper prizes, but it was a pat on the back for engaging. And it wasn't to say that you did the right choice or you made the wrong choice. It was just really for being connected to the experience. So we moved forward about 6 to 8 months, and we revisited lowlifes, and we wanted to build in more personalisation. So one of the things that we're really keen to do is engage audiences. So if there's a TV show where you have a weekly episode, you want to engage the audience between those episodes. If you have a web series, to engage the audience between those episodes. And we feel that this kind of personalisation is one way to do that, to really make this engaging. So we've shown it on a sort of a classroom situation. It's definitely possible to do it in an entertainment situation. So here, what we developed was an open story world. It was like a whodunit. And that means there were several characters. So you start off in a similar kind of way. Email the private detective and you tell her that you want to help. It's a different scenario now. There's been a murder and she wants you to find the murderer, the murder weapon and the motive. And it's only when you have all three that you actually can make a conviction. So she gives you a lead. She tells you about the boss. There's a security guard that was on duty that night, and the deceased as a girlfriend. Why not start asking questions of her? And so the audience needs to communicate with these characters in order to reveal information about the world and information about this crime. And here, what we do is we tag people based on how they proceed with their questioning. So, for example, if you communicate with the girlfriend of the murder victim and you offer your condolences, you say, I'm really sorry for your loss, it's a tragedy what's happened, any of these kinds of phrases, then you're tagged as sympathetic. And that means that as the story unfolds, she's much more helpful to you and she's much more forthcoming with information than if you don't say that you're, if you're unsympathetic. So this is another example looking at what you can do with personalisation. So 101 Ways to Die wants to be a US TV show, and the guys are currently pitching the pilot, and they wanted to put together a transmedia package so that it wasn't just the pitch for the TV show, but they had ideas about how audiences were going to be engaged between these episodes. So in the show, there's because it's a fictional show, there's a security company, private security firm called Clarion Security. And when we looked at the transmedia opportunities and the participation of the audience around the show, we said, well, why don't we get people to sign up to the security company, and then they can send them on these kind of quests and see how they build their profile in this world. So they're kind of role-playing around the show. So they're not affecting the way the show rolls out. The show is scripted. There's nothing that the audience can do to affect the show, but they can role-play in the much larger story world. So here we have, when you sign up, when you say, I want to join, you get sent a text message that says, answer this first question. You can only save one person. Do you save the young woman or the old man? You answer that, you get a second question, and it says you're in gangland territory and you only get one opportunity to shoot the leader. You've got a 50-50 chance, do you take the shot? Now what we can do is look at these responses in this kind of grid. So you have people that said shoot and old, and we said, right, they're a guardian. And you have people that said I'm going to save the young woman, but I'm going to wait before I take the shot. And so now they're elitist. And so we have these kind of 4, let's say, personality styles that we can use to tailor or personalise the experience to that particular person. Now, it's all just for fun. It's all kind of about, there's no real psychometric profile. It's just a way to really kind of hone the experience to make it more engaging for that person. And also, of course, we hope that they'll go back and replay it. And coming back to the reason for the company, we want to create remarkable experiences. We want people to talk about this. So if I get together with my friends and I'm an elitist and someone else is a perfectionist, you find that actually we had a different experience going through it, and now maybe I want to go back and choose a different set of questions and see how the experience unfolds for me. And this is really at the heart of what we're doing with Transmedia Storytelling. It's this combination of narrative, of storytelling, gaming, and social networking. It's the marketing, the social media marketing, baked into the entertainment, so that you think from the beginning, how are we going to get people to talk about this experience? How are we going to get them to share it? So just to look under the hood of Conductor, because this is how we're approaching this sort of personalisation, this story evolution. So at the top layer there, we have this content layer. So Conductor is a network intelligence. So we don't actually host any content. The content is out there on social media platforms, on Flickr, on YouTube, wherever. We only tell that content when it should be made public or when it should be given to a particular individual. And the determination of when that content should be made public or given to someone is the responsibility of this control layer. And the control layer is listening for events from individual members of the audience, so that I can personalise for that one person. It's listening to the aggregate activity of the whole audience that's participating in this, and also real-world events like date and time changes and so on. And so you see that you can start to develop the story based on the individual, everybody, and on particular groups. So a group might be very simply a language group. So if you set up an English-speaking group and a Spanish-speaking group, you could then have a multilingual character. But it might also be the sympathetic group or the unsympathetic group. And so now we can look at this kind of feedback mechanism. So we might send out a call to action for the individual to do something, and they react, and that determines how the experience unfolds for that one person. And then it could be how the community reacts. So you might have a Facebook character in a love triangle, and she says, I'm really torn between David and Simon. I don't know which one of these guys is right for me. And then that's a kind of call to action for followers of this story to, add their kind of comments on the Facebook page to say, I really like Simon, you should definitely go with him, I really like David. And the character can reply on the Facebook page or anywhere else. You could send them a text message or whatever to say, yeah, I hear what you're saying about Simon, so on and so forth. And then we can take the aggregate of all the responses and say, well, on balance, most people think she should go with Simon. And then she could go against the grain. She could decide, no, I'm not going to listen to that, or she could go. But the point is that we're asking the audience to participate in this story world and then evolving the story world for the individual and for everybody. So I wanted to look at what might be holding us back. And I remember, we've sort of worked on this now for about a couple of years, working with other people across a range of different industries. And these are some of the common things that we find we still have problems with. So we want to be just a technology provider, but we find that many people, even when they have the enthusiasm, they don't really have the right skill set yet for writing these participatory cross-platform stories. And that's one reason why I kind of just gave away my book, Getting Started in Transmedia Storytelling, because I want more people out there that are kind of clued into this and know how to do it. But we've also been learning And we've been developing processes that we want to share, and some of those I'm going to give away in this presentation. But it's also like a common language. If I say participation, it might not be what somebody else hears or understands to be participation, for example. And just documentation, just being able to sit down on the same project team and be able to share ideas to communicate the way this experience is unfolding, this user journey or whatever, is very difficult. Then we come on to the presentation discovery, the labelling of the experience, the way it's given to the audience. Because we don't want to confine transmedia storytelling to be one particular, definition. We want it to be multiple things. It could be a location-based game. It could be, an unfolding franchise of a movie or something. But there needs to be some kind of consistency, I think, of presentation so that the audience knows what they're getting into. And also, I think there's been this concern about the replayability, that I put all this effort into an experience and it lasts for a couple of weeks and only a fraction of people play it and then it's gone. So these are things that have been kind of taking up our attention. So I'm very pleased to say that from today, and this is a sort of breaking news, we've developed this Conductor app, and it's available today for download from the Conductor website. And it means that any story that's hosted on Conductor immediately is available on the app. So that takes away a whole layer of cost for transmedia storytellers. And it's meant that you now have a consistent way, whatever your type of story, to present that to the audience. And this should look kind of familiar, even though we're talking about lots of different experiences. So there's a very short description that sets up the premise. Maybe it's more experiential than it is a sort of laid-back storytelling. We've chosen the duration. What's the commitment from me? Now, it might sound a bit strange if let's say if you've got a book and you go to Amazon, it said it's going to take you 3 days to read this, or it's going to, you don't measure a book by number of days, but you might look at the number of pages. And if you look at a game, quite often, you would see them advertise there's 40 hours of gameplay, or you'll see people complaining that they spent $40 and only got 6 hours of gameplay. So I think that the time, the more we get into this, we see that transmedia really is kind of painting with time. I know that lots of people talk about photography, about painting with light. I think one of the key things to master with transmedia storytelling is this manipulation of time, the perception of time, how frequently you ask the audience to do something and how long sustained period they're asked to do that. So because all the intelligence is hosted in the cloud, it means that what we're offering is a portal for your experience. It still runs in the cloud. The storytelling is still available across all these different platforms. We have an API, which means if you have a forum, if you have your own kind of flash game or even a console game, you can communicate with us about the audience. So if someone's very active on a forum, it's quite common to have different levels in a forum based on how active somebody is. That information can be sent over our API to Conductor, and then that would affect potentially the way the story unfolds for that person. And inside the app, people get these familiar kind of things. They can see their progress, they can get experience points, they can win badges. So I'm very very cautious when I mention the word gamification, because it has so many nasty connotations actually. But I think there are different types of people that like these games, and this is kind of like signposting that they are actually making progress, and they do work. Leaderboards and these kind of badges do work, but it's entirely up to you. All these experiences are kind of developed by you, the author, and then you can choose, how far you want to go with this or not. And I think what's really groundbreaking about this is that you don't need many resources to start going out. You saw that first example of Lowlifes. That was just $500 working with the resources that we had, and now you have a mobile app. So now you can just say to people, go and get the Conductor app, you'll find us on there, and already built in, without any kind of development costs, you have experience points, you've got progress, you've got badges that you upload. You decide the badges, you just need to upload the graphic and decide when, what activity someone needs to do in order to win that. And I think that because we've now released this portal, if somebody over here is running an experience and you now release yours on the same portal, it's going to be much easier for audiences to cross-collateralise between these. Because if somebody plays like The Dark Knight and they're in the street doing all this kind of crazy stuff, painting up their face, it's very difficult to get them back again because they've all kind of disappeared off somewhere. And I think now this will really help move the industry along. So I said I wanted this to be an inspiring talk, and I've talked about some of the things that we've done, some of the kind of our approach really, and now I'm going to look at some of the methodologies before I finish with an example of a work in progress. So this is a diagram that I've presented many times before, and it's looking at these kind of 6 key areas and making sure that these are all in sync with each other. That you understand the audience, you understand why they would use those platforms, you understand where you're going to take your revenue to pay for this experience and so on. But this is really just the start, and we've never really discussed, okay, so I've got all my ducks in alignment. I now kind of know what the experience is, how it's going to play out. But now I actually need to write something. Now I actually need to write the story. This diagram is probably a little bit too detailed, but basically we start with the business model. So if your experience is, you're going to get your money back or your revenue predominantly from a feature film, then you would start writing the script first and then go back to look at the other elements. But you don't necessarily complete it. So if your first experience, if you're going to generate revenue from the sales of a book, then you would start writing the book. But this diagram says you don't need to finish it all. Get to about 80 or 90% finished and then look at the participation stuff that you've already anticipated. You've already said to yourself, I'm going to have these elements, but you can't start writing everything at once. So write with the thing that you're going to make the money on, or that you're most familiar with, is often the case, and then start writing this second platform. And keep going through this iteration so that one platform informs the story on the other. So when we put this together in a kind of formal methodology, we see that first diagram, those 6 kind of pillars, as being the business planning stage, and then we look at definition, how we're going to engage with the audience, and then a design and implementation. And I'm going to look specifically at this definition stage because this is the participation side that I'm most interested in, actually. So when we look at story development for a transmedia experience, what we're doing, and when we work with clients, is that we still have this 3-act structure, and we find that we might have these points along the timeline that are already, we call them anchors, these spots on the diagram where we have to meet that point. It could be like, for example, if it was a brand, they might say, well, we need to get people into the store. We want to get them to get hands on this product. And so that would be like some kind of participation element that was fixed in stone, and we needed to write the story that incorporated that in some way. And it might be that you have, in Act 3 there, I've got another anchor. There's a story, the way this story resolves is really important because it's the prequel to what's going to go on next in another platform. And we find ourselves kind of moving through this coil. We start with an idea and we kind of try to write the experience as we move through these 3 acts, but being mindful of these different points that we need to take into account when we move forward. And it's this constant back and forth between the participation and the story. And we've developed this approach. So if you think of that first diagram, we're looking at the definition phase, and now we have a much more detailed look now at this definition, what that means. It means writing the synopsis. What is the story? What is the experience? Can you actually present it to someone in a very clear way? Because if you can't explain the experience in a few sentences, then it's already too complicated. And it's always been the way for a feature film or a book, but my goodness, it's definitely like vital on a transmedia storytelling experience if you want people to interact with these different platforms. And I think this is a key area, this engagement. I mean, engagement really is key. So you need to know why someone would want to interact with this world. You know, what are they getting out of it? What's the fun part for them? Actually, what does it entail? How's it going to be personalised? How's it paced? And I want to present a diagram that looks at this this area, this engagement area. So let's assume that you have some single linear media, like a book or a film or even a game, something that's packaged. And now you're looking to build audience engagement around this thing, this monolith. So what this diagram attempts is to find these different ways, different opportunities to engage people. And in the bottom corner here, we have the audience working as an outsider. They're kind of looking at the experience and they're commenting on it. And if you look at lots of social TV activity, it's people talking about the show. They're not in the show with the characters. They're not kind of role-playing. They're actually talking about the show. Did you see what he did? Did you see what they did? They're talking with their friends. Now, that might still be valid, but it's them working as an outsider. If you look at, I mentioned before about particularly documentaries, but lots of other transmedia experiences, producing lots of content, that's in this area. Quite often, we're still on this kind of intellectual sort of participation, giving people more content, getting them to explore, getting them to do stuff, rather than necessarily getting them to feel. And so as we move up this end, we have the audience working as a companion in this story world, companion to your characters. And here we're trying to give them dilemmas, give them choices, and we're trying to make them feel it in their heart more than in their head, and they're much more embedded in the story world. But they're kind of guided. So these are scripted things, and the conclusion will be what you determine it to be. So, I mean, too infrequently people really know what the premise of their project is. You know, what is it that the writer is trying to say? And that's crucial, I think, with transmedia storytelling, to get the consistency. And if you want people to participate, and particularly in this companion area, you need to know what it is you're saying, so that when you give the audience an experience, the result of that experience is that they actually understand what you were trying to tell them. But not by sitting down and reading it, but they actually feel it in their heart. They're led to the same conclusion through this experience. And in the actor area, this is where you give people the tools. You build out the story world, but you don't necessarily lead them through a scripted experience. And I'm going to give some examples of these now. I'm just going to skip over this, but this is saying what I already said about social TV. Quite often, all the activity is an outsider talking about the show, and if there is second screen content, it's usually B-roll and extras, star interviews, this type of stuff. It's all external, normally, to the actual story that's in the show. So let's look at an example. So this is a work in progress. It's a feature film called Masque of the Red Death. So it's an independent production, and the idea is that this will go straight to DVD. So there's no kind of expectation that this is going to be a blockbuster or anything like that, but we hope that the people that like horror films, the people that like dystopian futures, that this is going to be something for them. The producer's well recognised in this area. On that first slide, I've made a couple of films in the horror genre, and so we're hoping that, you know, this is going to be a success on DVD. So let's look at the project structure. So at the top is the producer of the feature film, and then I'm working under him as the transmedia producer. So he owns the budget for the film, he owns the financial responsibility of making this work, and I've been given a budget to work with the transmedia elements. Now the reason that he's made this money available is to try to build an audience ahead of selling this DVD, this project, to a distributor. So he wants to support the price. So we're looking to engage the audience and show that this project has legs, that there's an enthusiastic audience waiting for this film to come out ahead of its actual release. And you'll see that on the side here, we have the feature script writer who's written the script, and we have a graphic design and branding company, BTL Brands, who are looking at not just like the packaging design on the DVD, but also looking at the graphical elements inside the film and across all of these other participatory experiences, so that everything has a consistent look and feel. Now, of course, that's being driven from the script and from the director, who has a particular vision, a particular look and feel, and then these guys are interpreting that and having this conversation about how it should roll out. And we have 4 different participatory types of experience for this, and I'm going to explain these a little bit. So some time ago, I presented this diagram that is intended to be a very quick way to show someone what your experience does. And so we have this axis. So here, if you look at story and gaming, you might very quickly think of this as kind of sit back or sit forward. Like how much is story? If you look, say, like Angry Birds, is there really a story in Angry Birds? No, so that's probably not very much of one. So it's more down into gaming. If you look at Mass Effect or BioShock, then maybe it's spread between the two. There's much more story involved in that than there is gaming. And how pervasive is it? How much of this experience is based in the real world, requiring people to go to real locations, trying to convince them that this fictional world is actually a real place? And how much participation is there? So I'll explain this after a drink. So this is how we present our transmedia experiences. So here we've divided it into online and real world, so you could say like online and offline. And notionally, time runs from here that way, so this is now, that is later. And you'll see this radar diagram tagging these different timelines, so that at a glance we can look down and we say, okay, yeah, that Wastelander experience, that's much more about story and participation than it is gaming and real world. And if we look at the web series, which is there, of course, so in this case, there's no participation. It's kind of sit back and enjoy it. And it's actually a prequel to the feature film. So how did we get there? So this is the workflow, or this is how the project kind of came together. So Masque of the Red Death is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe. And the producer decided that this short story would make a great horror film. It was made once before in 1964 with Vincent Price, but this is going to be a reimagining. So the producer created a short synopsis that set this film, this short story, in the future, in a dystopian Britain. And then, working with me, we came up with a transmedia strategy. So even before we'd written the script, or before there was funding had been approved, we're already looking at the audience engagement and the marketing around this film because it's so key. Having got that, and together with the director's vision, we put the strategy, the synopsis, the vision together for funding. And when we got the funding, then we started working on the script. Now, as the script was being written, once it was about 80% done, then we could start to look at these other experiences. So we knew broadly the type of thing we wanted to do and why we were doing them, and what the goals were, but they hadn't been written yet. And here we see this diagram again. So the web series is this content that people explore. It tells a prequel to the feature film. But we have a companion exercise, we have a Wastelander experience, and we have these tarot cards. So with the Psychothol experience, we're inviting people. So, okay, in the film, there's a rich guy, and he drags all of his friends just before London gets wiped out in a nuclear holocaust. He drags all of his friends into this big warehouse. And the reason he's able to do this is because he's a big kind of drug baron. He's made a fortune from sales of pharmaceuticals, and specifically this kind of LSD type drug that was the first legal recreational hallucinogen. So we wanted to allow people to sign up for clinical trials of this drug, of this LSD drug. And when people sign up, they're led through a journey, a story that's scripted, based on what we want to reveal about the prequel to the film, like some backstory to this character that isn't in the film or in the web series. And then as we move across to these tarot cards, that there are tarot cards in the film that are used to kind of exert some kind of psychic force over the rich folk. And we're making these tarot cards available for people to download, but we're not telling them how they should be used. And so we're hoping that people, well, we're doing more than just hope, we've kind of designed them with this kind of participation in mind, that people will invent their own rules and upload the rules for different types of game based on these cards. So the way that we've designed these, although we're calling them tarot cards, it's kind of a shorthand because they're a cross between like top trumps and lots of other kind of cards, these kind of adventure role-playing tabletop games. So they're designed in lots of different ways so that they have a multitude of functions. And it allows people to role-play in this story world, even though there's no actual story around the cards. So this is just a quick look at the way we look at participation. So we have this jargon that we call quests, and quests might not mean the same to everybody, but it's a unit of audience activity. And it might look like a branching narrative, but it's actually how, let's say, the experience is personalised. So if someone goes to a particular quest, then they get tagged in a particular way, we know what they've done, and it leads on to another one. And this is my final slide, actually. This is the fake poster for a fake drug that's on a fake website, inviting people to trial this drug. Now, this poster will be used as part of our marketing, but it's also part of the film. The cards themselves will be used as part of the marketing. Quite often at film festivals, for example, or in cafes, you might leave behind a postcard, some kind of flyer. We'll be leaving behind these tarot cards. The tarot cards have a code, and if you tweet the code, that unlocks story and points and so on. Our mobile app will be tying all these different experiences together so that it brings together a coherent sort of experience for the user. Thank you very much.
Si tenéis alguna pregunta. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta para Robert. ¿No hay preguntas?
Well, can I just do it in English or?
Yeah, if you do it in Spanish, then someone will translate it.
Okay. Bueno, yo quería.
Yeah.
¿Qué auto se escucha esto?
Sorry, it would help if I put this on. I'm living in the future where it happens automatically.
Yo quería saber cómo defines el Psychofall experience y el Wastelander experience.
It didn't get translated.
How do you define the Psychofall experience or the Wastelander experience? How can you explain that?
It's way too distracting. How do you mean? How do we define it?
How do you actually work with it? How do you what are the bases to work with these experiences?
So first off, we say to ourselves, what's the goal? So the goal is to engage an audience over maybe like a 3 to 5 week period. It's not to busy them out, but it's really to try to stay top of mind. And it's going to be up and working before the film comes out, but it's going to be there forever. So that if someone watches the DVD and they're intrigued to find out more, then they can go back and play it. So it needed to be replayable. And the idea is that it keeps the thing top of mind. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we start to think, well, what would be interesting for people to do? How can we make this, how can we stay true to the premise so that it definitely feels like it's in the story world? And how can we make it fun to be part of? And then we go through that little coil diagram. So now we've got these different dots on the map that we know what our time period is. And then we start to just, the creative process takes over, to be honest. We know that we're working with the writer. I'm trying to think how it starts. Yeah, so you're invited to sign up for a clinical trial, and then I can tell you that the clinical trial goes wrong. So you still have these 3 acts. So the first act is setting the scene, establishing everything. Then the second act, there's a conflict arises. So things start to go wrong, and you need to make decisions about how you're going to react to that. And then there's a resolution at the end. So it's still using kind of normal storytelling ideas, but I guess the foundations are in this participation, in our kind of engagement goals. I think that little diagram is a good way to do it, because it's almost impossible just to sit down and write it straight off. You kind of need to iterate a bit. And I think the key really is not to get it all finished and polished off and say, right, it's done. It's to get it into a state and then say, right, let's take another run through now and look at these other bits I want to incorporate, and keep going through it like that.
Robert, I have 2 questions. One is related to your experience in both sides of the work. Many people working in transmedia storytelling applied to entertainment or to fiction. They say that it's very difficult to find useful experiences done in the big market in the United States, for HBO, Disney and big companies, because the way we work in Europe is different. Could you please explain a little bit how do you find these differences to work in America and work in Europe? And second, the way you work. I mean, when you work with different companies, when you are consulting or you're working with these companies, do you think the producers, big companies and independent producers too, are understanding the different roles that are needed to understand the creative process for a transmedia project?
There's not as many differences as you might imagine. I think I don't sign as many NDAs in the UK as I do in America. Yeah, of course. I'm trying to think. See, when I get invited, the way I always pitch it is as an audience engagement. So I'm going in specifically to say, or when people approach me, what's on their mind is how do we retain an audience, or how do we engage them? So I might have a particular one-sided view. And I think everybody has the same problems, like both sides of the Atlantic. And even amongst different sort of content people. I mean, we're working with an author now that's going to bring out a series of 12 books, and he wants to maintain momentum between these books. He doesn't want to bring out one book and then 6 months to a year later he brings out another book and everyone's forgotten about him. So I think there are actually much more similarities. I think that in Europe, the word has just not caught on, and that there are people experimenting, but they don't talk about it very much. I mean, people approach me and you think, well, I've never heard of this project before. It wasn't on social media, no one, it wasn't a big fanfare about it, but they've been quietly working away on it. So I think there are actually lots of examples, but I think we are at that stage where everyone's experimenting. I mean, just to give an example from the past, when desktop publishing first came out, everybody felt the need to throw every single font at the page. And you'd look at that and go, oh my goodness, and that's like being attacked on your eyes. And it's the same with electronic music. When the first synthesizers came out, everybody tried to do everything at once. And I think that's where we are now. And I think people are still experimenting, and nothing's really settled down yet to the point where people can say, you know what, I'm much more likely to get success if I go in this direction than if I don't. And I think a typical problem is there's too much content that people see, like, wow, it's brilliant, all this stuff that I couldn't fit in the film, I can now put on the website. This is a very typical thing. But it doesn't actually lead to engagement. It doesn't, and that's the problem. And also, if you're thinking about like behind the scenes footage and so on, although it might be part of your sort of social media strategy, it's only a certain sort of proportion of your sort of interest graph that are really, interested to do that. And I think that it's the storytelling which is key. Again, if you look at publishers, studios and so on, if you look at their social media, it tends to be them just talking about themselves. Oh, the new book's coming out, or, this is happening, and now, Cameron Diaz has broken a fingernail. What's really interesting is that they have these stories. Why not take the characters from the story and put them online, give them social media accounts and allow the audience to engage with the story rather than just talk about the project that's happening. And I think that's common on both sides of the Atlantic. I also see, so there's much more funding from arts councils, like taxpayer funding of projects here, but I don't think that it necessarily has led to innovation, actually. I think in the States, because of the way that these projects are funded, either privately or collectively, there's a much more of a struggle, and there's a much more thinking about, is someone going to buy this, or is the audience actually going to be connected with that? Whereas in Europe, because of the taxpayer funding of arts projects, it's much more related to the curator that's going to sign off the project and cultural issues, and they can result in some really interesting projects, but they tend to be very earnest. And they, especially if they're about social causes, and this is a problem both, and they tend to be a little bit boring. And I think it's finding a way to actually find this engagement, to find the fun, if you want, even if it's a really serious issues. I think that's the problem. There is money available from private sources in the States and from these kind of new media funds and stuff like that, but I don't know that the successes are particularly better over here.
Hi. My question is about, you're talking about business models, but do you think about integrating brands or commercial brands as branded content on the story? Yes. And in this case, how will they fit, or this idea will fit on the transmedia strategy? And the second question is, very quick one, is how do you measure the success of that transmedia project? So when we work with brands, it's very important to know that, again, it comes back to this premise. So what is the brand premise? Like, what does the brand stand for? What is the brand story? How would that be as an experience? So if someone was going to engage with a brand in a transmedia experience, would they come away knowing what the brand stood for? So that's the first thing. And the problem for transmedia creators is that you need to be close to the brand or the agency to get that. And I find that, or we have found, that it's quite difficult to go and pitch a project directly to the brand, because then you get referred back to the agency, who are obviously very protective of their client. And so you might be better off pitching to the agency your skill set and what you could do. But if you've already have a finished project, the chances of that project really meeting the needs or the premise of a brand is very slim. Because even if you say, right, this is a really edgy project, so it might be like Diesel or Dr. Martens or something, like this collection, they each have a very specific thing. And also the agency has a particular, like, the way that, I'm going to say a campaign, but a way that brand should evolve over time. And it's very key that project fits in with that. So I think what we've found is that people might pitch an idea, they get, the agency likes it, but then they might come back with a different idea later, rather than go forward on this particular project. When you talk about measuring success, again, it comes down to what the goals are. So each brand, when they do something like this, they might have a different reason. It might be for awareness, it might be preference, it might be sales perhaps. And so so depending on what they want to do, it would change the way that we measure it. With our Conductor platform, we just journal everything to a data file. So every interaction is journaled, and then based on the project and what the requirements are, then we can just sort of basically run a macro on the data to extract the stuff. I mean, a good example of a brand experience, I think, a successful one, was by Intel for Toshiba, as part of their partnership marketing program. So they'd done some research and discovered that Toshiba was perceived by this young audience, 18 to 24-year-olds, as being their dad's brand. And this wasn't acceptable. They wanted to be young and hip. And so Intel put together with their agency basically a web series where people could interact with this girl that was captured inside a room by a kidnapper. They could interact with her on Facebook. And so the objective there was for preference. So it wasn't to generate sales of laptop computers. It was to shift the needle, to change the perception so that this younger audience would now consider buying a Toshiba where they wouldn't have in the past. And they said this was like fantastically successful, what they did. It was a web series. It ran out, I think it was about 9 episodes or something. And there was lots of Facebook interaction. So it's a really good example.
It's very interesting, but I prefer to act in Spanish.
Okay.
Mi pregunta es si es necesario estar respaldado por una gran empresa o una buena marca para desarrollar.
Okay. Number 4. Ah, okay. I did it on the wrong channel. That's probably why. Now I can hear you. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Mi pregunta es si es necesario estar respaldado por una gran empresa o una gran marca para que el proyecto pueda tener éxito, o yo como persona individual con 4 amigos, un poco de dinero que pongamos y una buena idea y mucho trabajo podemos desarrollarlo. Y en tal caso, si me podría dar algún consejo para desarrollar un buen proyecto.
Yeah. I think you definitely can do it on your own, and I think that Lowlife's project is an example of us just working with what we had. We had a writer and myself that had sort of video equipment. The key really is to know your audience. So if you've got together 4 friends and you want to do something, you say, well, what would be fun? Who is it we're making this for? And where will we find those people? Where do they hang out? You know what? Because you have to see your content as your experience as contributing to a particular community. So rather than make something and then sort of shout over to people, say, hey, I've made this, come over here, is to find the audience first, find out what they're already buying or playing or, you know, getting enjoyment from, and say, how can we make a contribution to that, to add something to that, what they already enjoy? And you totally can. I don't think it needs to be. I also feel like if you start small and you will learn a lot, and you will also gain confidence, and you can gain visibility, and then you can take that to try to get more money, because it's much better to have a working prototype even of this story, if you want to call it like that, maybe some I think the thing though is not to present works in progress. So do something small but perfectly formed, something small that works for what it is, rather than lots of rough sketches and this type of thing. Because not everybody wants to get involved in the creation process. They're interested to have the fun, but maybe they don't want to help you make it. So I would say just try to make it small, manageable, and then just put it out. Yeah, totally, you can do it.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is about, well, I have to tell you a story first. It all goes back to attention economy, right? I really like how you mention audience engagement. And a few weeks ago in Portugal, I heard about a story where a company only had 1,000 euros to spend on a project, and they ended up using this money to send 1 cent to 1,000 people over their, 10,000 people over their bank accounts with the name of the company and the website. So I thought this was a really cool way of using a new medium that nobody had thought about. This is like Marshall McLuhan, everything is a medium, right? So do you have examples of this kind of exotic mediums that that few people have heard about, like transferring money to people, for example?
You know what? I tend to avoid those examples, to be honest, because it's probably a personal thing, but I kind of feel they're not very genuine, and I'm more about the storytelling. So I keep trying to bring it back to the story. I mean, what it reminds me of is it's much more related to kind of social media campaign than necessarily transmedia storytelling, what you're describing. I remember this project where if you liked the brand on Facebook, then they would donate like $1 to plant a tree to re-green this particular area. So this sounds like, oh, this is brilliant. But when you think they're probably paying like $2 a click, and they've got all this other money they're spending on old media advertising, banner advertising to bring attention, I wrote to them, I said, why don't you just take all that money and just get on with it? And then rather than donate $1 for every like, why don't you just take that money and just go buy a load of trees and plant them? So there's like an inconsistency there, because all they wanted to do is buy a load of people, and it's called greenwashing. And so I'm not really into those things. I much more prefer to think through how can we get people to, really, gift your stuff. I mean, you should definitely stick around for Henry Jenkins' talk on Wednesday, because he doesn't like the word viral, because the idea is that this video just goes out and everyone passes it on like a kind of disease. They have no agency in there. And he uses the word sharing, and I do too, because it's much more about gifting. So if somebody sees a video, why would I share that with someone else? Well, it's got to give me status. It's got to say, it says something about the relationship between me and the person that I'm sending it to, and so on and so on. And I think that if you look at these kinds of, if you ask yourself these types of questions when you're developing your transmedia stories, they're going to grow much more organically by word of mouth, rather than this type of approach. Now, it might be that was appropriate for that brand, but that's not something that I typically try to get into, even if it might work. That's the thing.
Over here.
Sorry.
Before I forget, are you going to offer your slides for the people who are?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I'll put those. They might already be online, but if they're not, then I will put them online.
Thanks. One of the things I want to know was, first, the proportion of time preparing for the project versus the time that it's actually live in your previous projects.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well,
time is money.
Yeah, of course. Well, the thing with Low Lives was that took like forever, because it was all, it was one of these projects that we were kind of doing in our spare time. It kind of depends on how much effort you want to put in. So for that psychothol, it probably took it probably took about 3 days to implement in Conductor, and it probably took a day or so for the writer to write the experience. But I doubt that she was sat at the keyboard, working full time on that. And then it took much less time than it took to write the script. So, but you tend to cut your cloth to what you've got. So if you know that you only have a certain amount of time to do it, or you only have a certain amount of resource, then you design the transmedia experience so that it doesn't take up forever. It comes back to the business case again,
But from initial idea until finally you went live, more or less, that's what I was asking about, the proportion of time.
Well, the elapsed time, I like to use as much time as possible. So if you give me a deadline, then I like to, because then the ideas, your subconscious often comes up with much better ideas than you can. So you often need to sleep on these things, and then because quite often if you do these kind of brainstorming things, what first comes up is whatever's top of mind, and that tends to be cliche. So that might be a very quick way to get into it, but let's just discard all of that and then take some time. But that's more like the creative process. So we started Psychothol. I think the press release went out at the Berlin Film Festival, which may have been back in February perhaps. I can't remember now. And then, or March. But a couple of months we've probably been working on it, but not full time. It's just been sort of backwards and forwards, because the writer's got other projects to work on and the graphics guys have got other stuff. And it's still sort of bubbling along, it's still like ticking along, really.
Amazing. I thought you were going to say like a year before it finally went live.
No chance. Because I'm going to plug my own platform again. I mean, there's no coding. So if you have an idea, you just come up. So we've already taken care of. So you create a character, and then you just give it the social media accounts or email accounts that you want. So all that coding's already been taken care of. You just go in, write the story, attach the accounts, and then it's live at, within the next 15 minutes or something.
Okay. And my second question was in terms of funding, which in your slides you just very briefly mentioned with a red square, and that's for us, I guess, one of the key issues. You were mentioning the difference between the UK model and the US model, private versus public funding, but the EU, we have no money anymore, so there's not going to be any public funding anyway. So I was just wondering if it's so hard to actually match a project with an existing brand. Normally, for your projects, where do you tend to go for funding?
Well, they tend not to be my projects, to be honest. It's normally working with someone else on their project who already have the funding or already have their sort of ideas. But I think what you need to do is sell people what they've already bought before. So if people are used to buying books, or if people are used to buying, an author's, the prospect that an author will write a book, they're used to optioning content, then that's what you sell. Because it's easier for them to understand, rather than try to go in and sell something big. I'll give you another example. I'll give you a really good example, right? So Roswell in New Mexico, home to all these alien landings and so on. So the local municipality says everybody comes in town for the film festival, and this year there's going to be a comic convention, and nobody visits the neighbouring areas. We've got all this history from like nuclear testing and ancient kind of Native Americans and so on. We want people to find out more about the town. All right, so how's that going to be financed? Local businesses, there's like a visitor's guide. They're used to paying for advertisements to go into a local business guide. This year, they're paying to go into the local business guide. As usual, that's what they normally spend money on. But they can also pay for points, because when visitors come into town this year, they'll see that these different properties, like a restaurant or whatever it might be, has got different points. And if they go check in at that place, they're going to get more points. And points lead to prizes. So that's what's funded it, the local businesses, and they were pitched what they normally are used to paying for. Around that, what they were told was, we've got this big story world, and we're going to put up these public notice boards in hotel foyers. You can have one in your restaurant if you want to pay more for that. And we're getting people to go to these go to these notice boards to fill out a grid, which will be a GPS location of an alien landing. So people arriving in Roswell this year from 9th of June will know that in 14 days' time, there's going to be an alien landing, but they don't know where it is. And they need to visit these different points of interest. There's 32 points of interest. And each time they visit and check in, they will unlock story content that will help them find this, basically one digit to go into this grid that will become a GPS coordinate. So that's the big story world. And the local production company there in Roswell put together a very nice guide that explained all of this that would be going on. But actually what they were asked to put up money for was to go into the advertising, the local kind of visitors leaflet, which they normally spend money on. So I think that is the key, actually, rather than try to sell them this experience and convince them it's a good idea. It's that.
For people who already want to hire an outsourcer to do the transmedia experience, more than being the transmedia creative team who proposes that idea to somebody else.
No, not really. In that example, you could look at a problem. So you say, like, well, look at these businesses. Like, who's got money, right? So you look around and you say, well, what's their problem? How can I help? How can my transmedia storytelling project help them with their problem? It might be that there are lots of rich people who don't know what to do with their money, right? This is true, because if they're successful, they spend all their time at work and it's very demoralising, and they want to have a legacy, they want to be remembered for something, and this is why people buy, they support artists and have, these patrons. The thing is, for your experience to fit nicely with that patron and obviously to come in contact with them, the best thing you can do is, rather than imagine this massive project that's going to cost millions of pounds to do, just do something simple that shows, that illustrates what you can do, and then start building and try to snowball it from there. Because if you try with these big mammoth projects, it's going to take you forever to find the financing. So try to work with the resources that you have, with your contacts that you have, wherever they might be. And even if, let's say you have contacts that don't have any money, but they do have social networks, then work with them to try to get the word out to find people that do have the finance. It would be nice to make a living from doing transmedia storytelling, or from writing a book, or from making feature films, or any of these other, but very few people actually do unless they work in a big company. And so I think that the key is really to do something that you can do with a research. It's better to get something out there and start building a name, start building some kind of like reputation in this area, than to sit on this mammoth project that you keep struggling to finance. That would be my advice.
Who's a better company? The media?
Well, we can talk afterwards. We'll talk afterwards.
Hello. You have said that first you have to find your audience, but I think that's the most difficult. Could you give me some tips? Because maybe you have to follow your intuition, or you have to do some research, or maybe you have to choose the audience you like. Please give me some tips. Thank you.
Again, I think if you look at independent projects, normally the person making a project has like a keen interest in that particular area, and so they're connected with that audience already. So it's quite difficult if, supposing you have this idea for a story. I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, say for our Low Lives project. So we wanted to do this project. I was concerned about the homelessness situation in San Francisco. So I needed to find people that cared about homelessness the way I was disturbed by it. And so I approached the local organisations there. I did a search on Google, find out local charities. And I wasn't looking for money for them, but I was looking to get access into their community, to say to them that we have this project. It's an entertainment project, but it does have like a serious message. It doesn't, it's respectful of people who are homeless. And that's how I did it. Now, if it was a horror film, then you would say, right, where the horror fans hang out. There's lots of forums where horror fans hang out, and just, go through that. Like if it was romantic fiction, or a romance novel or whatever, then you'd say, well, I don't know, that's not my genre, I don't know. But I bet if you searched, or if you looked on Amazon, find people who read, it's put together a book, and then just start up a conversation with people to find out where they do hang out. Maybe they're all on Pinterest, I don't know.
Okay. Bueno, Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We pass now to the